Welcome back, viewers, to the PI Show. I hope you're enjoying this discussion on tasers usage in Victoria and worldwide. Professor, taser usage, why do we need them? Why are they bringing them in Victoria?
Well, I think the police are bringing them in because they want to add this particular weapon to the armoury that ordinary police already have, including firearms, capsicum spray, batons and so on. But the essential reason that the police say they wish to introduce them is to reduce the necessity to use firearms, in other words, shoot people, where they could be given an electric shock and subdued instead.
Professor, it looks like they're armed to go to Afghanistan these days with all the weaponry they're carrying.
Well, absolutely. It's bad enough having a look at policemen's belts right now. They'll have a new yellow taser gun to threaten people with once these are rolled out.
And Professor, the Australian and international experience clearly indicates that firearm usage has not reduced as a result of taser usage.
Well, that's a key point. Firearm usage, as far as we're aware from international experience, has not actually reduced. You might argue, well, it hasn't increased by as much as it might otherwise have, but it hasn't actually reduced. And as I indicated before, what has happened clearly is that the use of capsicum spray has now declined in favour of taser use. In other words, people are being hit by a more powerful weapon than they were previously.
Professor, sorry Tony, just quickly, Professor, isn't the real issue here, we don't know what this taser, this $50,000 electric shock does to the body, does to the person. One person can die from it,
Yep.
another person can live from it and be just knocked out. Isn't that the real issue here?
Well, one of the really significant issues here is that if you are firing a taser appropriately once and to a maximum twice at a normally healthy person, generally speaking, they won't suffer any serious injury or death. But the fact of the matter is that in most cases when tasers are used, they are fired at either a person who has a mental illness or a person who's drug affected or a person who's drunk and also, regrettably, overseas evidence also tends to suggest that tasers are fired more often at Indigenous people than they are at any other category of person. And Indigenous, so the risk here is that these people are already vulnerable for health reasons and therefore are not an example of the normally healthy population, and consequently they are more likely to be injured. In other words, the people against whom tasers are being used are the most likely people to be seriously damaged by their use.
John, recently the Victoria Police conducted a survey or study into the use of tasers in Victoria. Now, the two places that they implemented it was Morwell and Bendigo, which has got a high incidence of assaults on police, violent assaults.
Yes.
What are the results of this survey?
Tony, over a period of approximately 1 year, it was found that the use of the taser occurred 10 times, but not the actual...
Well, they drew it, but they didn't use it.
Exactly, yes. Yeah. So it was referred to in various instances and even pointed at, and people were like, oh, taser, taser, and running...
They panicked.
They panicked. But it was actually never physically used.
Professor, it wasn't used. Why?
Well, I don't know the precise circumstances under which the taser was drawn, but there are two things about this study that we need to appreciate. It was a 6-month study in 2 country areas. There was no trial in Melbourne, where most of the incidents
would occur.
King Street.
King Street.
Why was that?
Where the sorts of incidents that the police will have to cope with would occur. So that's the first thing.
Why do you think that occurred, Professor?
What?
That the study was in country Victoria and not in, let's say, CBD Melbourne?
I have no idea, but it's a basic
I think we know why,
in the
don't
study.
we?
I think it's a basic flaw in the study. The other thing that we need to appreciate about the study is that the taser guns that are going to be rolled out in Victoria now are not the same kind of taser guns that were used in the trial. Okay, so we've got no experience of the guns which are a new version of a taser that will now be rolled out
Gee, that's-
across the police
I've got
force.
two
that's
examples. I wanna
So,
give
so
you.
the trial is again flawed because you're not using the same weapon.
Okay. Can I give you a couple of examples here? There was a young fellow who hijacked a bus in Essendon a couple of years ago.
Yep.
The police attended. There was issues of safety to the public, issues of safety to the police. I think he had a knife. They shot him in the chest.
Yep.
If there was tasers available, they could have used a taser, Professor.
Well, depends how far they were from him, I guess, because tasers only work at a range of about a maximum of 2 metres, so they would have had to get close enough to him to use the taser.
And if he's he was actually in the driver's seat of the bus, wasn't he, Tony?
He was.
So you can't get close to him, can you?
Well, you have to
Unless
get to the door.
He wouldn't open the door.
Yeah, you probably
So-
smashed the door and fired a taser at
Yeah,
him.
well, yeah.
Well, yeah. So,
you know,
and he was psychologically disturbed,
He was
Tony.
mentally disturbed.
So,
Let's be.
would it have worked on a psychologically disturbed person?
Well, that's one of the biggest issues.
Well,
'cause most of
it is a big issue, but as I've said, I think before in our discussion today, 85% of use is against people with mental illness. Police have to be trained to understand what the illness is, what the symptoms are, how people are likely to react, how to talk them down, all of those sorts of things. Now, that takes longer, and it's more costly, but it's likely to save lives.
Professor-
It's likely to save lives, and that's the direction that the police ought to be going in.
The taser was used on one of your colleagues, another professor. Professor Robert Cunningham in Western Australia.
I'm
in Fremantle.
opposed to it already.
A professor in Fremantle was walking with his female companion, and police approached him and they fired the taser at him and the companion.
Gee.
He was exonerated by after they conducted an investigation, and he's now suing the Western Australian Police.
Well, you know, law professors, we're very litigious people. You know, I'll be on the phone to you, Tony, no worries. We'll
He
get
looked-
moving on this one immediately if I get tasered.
He looked pretty dodgy, this law professor, didn't he?
But the thing is this, obviously it sounds to me that they tried to get him to cooperate. It wasn't an issue of safety,
That's right,
was it?
that's right.
And that's where you're coming from,
Yeah,
Professor.
look, tasers ought to be used only in 2 circumstances, when there's a risk of death or serious injury to some person.
Okay.
But what we've got consistently overseas and in other states is what we call usage creep. So they're beginning to be used in a whole range of situations where there's no significant threat. They're being used in order to enforce a lawful demand by a policeman that a person stop or lie down or whatever. We've got a classic case of this in a case of Bug Me recently in the ACT, I think it was, where this person had been instructed to fall to the floor and lie on his stomach. He didn't want to do that. He was on his knees and he had his hands behind his head.
Oh,
the
gee.
police person said, lie down on your stomach. He said, I'm not going to lie down on my stomach. He still had his arms here, still kneeling down.
So they shot
Tasered.
him. Professor, look, this is a very contentious topic and we're going to have to come back to it another time. I really do want to thank you for coming on the show today.
A great pleasure.
You've been very it's been enlightening. John,
Thank you, Professor.
we'll
Thank
have
you,
to
Tony.
come back another time.
Yes.
Thank the Professor, thank John, and thank you viewers for watching. So stay tuned for future episodes and please stay safe. Thank you.